I decided, okay, I'll continue the advanced math. I was still enjoying it and found it interesting. So I continued on with Algebra 2, geometry, trig, calculus, and statistics. But I also continued my English and love of reading with more classic literature, including Shakespeare and Chaucer. One of the fun things along the way was learning the prologue to Canterbury Tales in Middle English. Wanda Aprila with a shorta sota, the rota marcha persa to the rota. But I digress. So, other choices in high school. I had to take a foreign language. My counselor said if you're going to go into a technical field, you might want to consider German. Not so much the case these days, but at the time it seemed like a good idea. I also went to summer session so that I could take a special class in earth science, where I learned about the folds in the earth that were just 10 miles from my home, which was the San Andreas Fault. And I took my first class in psychology, where I learned more about how the brain works and human behavior. The other thing I took was speech. Again, I was not I was not ecstatic about taking speech, we'll say, but it seemed like a good idea to know how to talk in front of people. And again, it did help overcome my shyness and teach me techniques to be able to do that. So now I was looking forward to college and I needed a summer job. I'd done a lot of babysitting, and of course there's always fast foods, but because I had taken all that math, I spent my summers as a computer. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, you know that the women in that movie who did the calculations to send us into space were called computers, basically human computers. So I was doing that, although my job title at that point was math aide or engineering aide. So I was using the calculus, geometry, and statistics I had learned in high school to calculate helicopter flight test data. And along the way, I discovered technical writing and editing. My boss handed me a report one day and said, "You're a good writer and you understand the technical content. Make this report make sense." So that was my introduction to technical writing. I was also introduced to computers, both the mainframe that took up a whole room, but also they received their first desktop computer, gave me the computer and a manual, and said, "Figure this out and program it to do the calculations you've been doing by hand." So I did. So college continued at UC Santa Barbara. Still not sure of my career path, but pursuing my interests and keeping doors open. I continued with calculus and statistics, lots of literature, more Shakespeare, lots of writing, and I pursued experimental psychology, testing rats in mazes to start with, and later testing freshmen, not in mazes, testing them with either psychological testing or even relaxation studies that were later used with the astronauts. I also took computer programming, the only two classes UC Santa Barbara had at the time. And I continued German for a while until I decided that that was not going to result in a career path for me. Along the way, I also participated in extracurricular activities, being part of a group and taking on leadership roles. My particular groups were dance, science club, church youth group, college sorority. But it could be any group. It gives you an opportunity to work as part of a team, which is very important in careers, and also take on leadership roles. So graduation day came. I was the first in my family to graduate from college. I graduated with a major in English with minors in experimental psychology and history. And as I like to joke, more math than any other English major in the history of mankind. So then, now what? Well, there were some challenges. There was a poor economy, so few jobs available. But I did find a job as an order clerk at NCR Business Systems, which exposed me to more about computers and business. But about a year later, my father passed away, and I moved home to help my mother and brother. But during that time, I met my future husband and earned a teaching credential. With no teaching credential or no teaching jobs available in the local area, I worked at County Department of Public Social Services and then at Social Security, which gave me more computer experience and opened doors to other federal government jobs, including a job at NASA as a technical writer-editor. And all of a sudden, my somewhat unrelated skills became important. I was doing the writing and editing that I loved, reviewing the documentation that Romy talked about, which included the technical subject matter and complex math, so my math and science applied as well. And of course, experimental psychology had taught me the experimental methodology, and one of our research fields at the NASA Dryden Flight Research Center was in human factors, how a pilot interacts with the plane and with the instrumentation. Along the way, I continued to add more tools to my toolbox. I attended night classes at the community college in computer programming, but also business, accounting, and business law. And my husband and I decided we needed to know more about computers, so we got a home computer and joined the Apple Computer Club, where we became co-presidents and newsletter editors, and joined a committee to put on a technology fair for the community. My next promotion brought some of those unrelated skills into the forefront again. With my computer experience, I figured out how to work with a team to develop and implement one of the first integrated publishing systems. I used my teaching and speaking skills to train engineers in technical writing, chair meetings, and advocate for funding and systems development. And my leadership skills applied to my role as a supervisor, but also I coordinated major technical conferences and led technical teams. One of the highlights or perks at NASA and at a lot of large companies is educational benefits. And during my time, I was able to finish a master's in public administration, plus a fellowship in business administration at Simmons College in Boston, and that was all at NASA's expense. So with another promotion, I brought those business and financial management skills even more into play. I became responsible for the computer systems, engineering, control rooms, radar tracking systems, telecommunications, and publication services. As one of my bosses said, you keep automating things, so we're going to put you in charge of it. So I was now coordinating a team of 40 to 50 NASA technical managers, overseeing technical services performed by 200 contract staff, and managing a budget of about $20 million a year. Of course, one of the big perks of working at NASA is the interesting work. The shuttle launched from the East Coast, but our facility was responsible for the original approach and landing tests with the shuttle, where we carried it aloft on the back of a 747 and then popped it off to land on the lake bed. And we were responsible for the first 25 or so landings on the lake bed, which meant that we were also hosting a lot of dignitaries who came to watch the landing. So I got to host the astronauts' families and dignitaries from the European Space Agency and some celebrities. We also did research on entirely new aircraft like the X-29 forward swept wing, where it looks like it has its wing on backwards, and that was to test the maneuverability of a different configuration. We tested the SR-71, which flew at 3 times the speed of sound at very high altitude, and particularly looking at the materials necessary to protect it from the heat it generated in flight, and also the propulsion systems necessary, since the engines had to be able to operate at very high altitude where the atmosphere is thinner. And I'm sure Romy is familiar with the winglets. Just about every commercial jet in operation now has these winglets on the tips of the wings. And we did the original testing of those at Edwards to prove that they would provide cost savings in the form of fuel. And, as one of my colleagues used to say, airlines would kill for a 5% savings in fuel. And this certainly provided that. And trucks, not something that you would normally associate with NASA, but one of our engineers came up with the idea that, if we can do this for aircraft, the aerodynamics still apply to trucks. And so looking at the traditional truck at that time, it was very squared off, everything was just stepped up. And he theorized that if we could smooth off those edges instead of having the step function, then it might improve the fuel economy. And it definitely did, which is why you now see almost every truck on the road has one of these airfoils. And of course, you know about some of the other projects from other NASA facilities like JPL in Pasadena. The the Mars rovers and the helicopter Ingenuity have been in the news a lot lately. The Ingenuity taking the first flights on another planet. And of course, we have satellites and cameras and telescopes exploring our universe and taking pictures of spectacular formations in the universe. And by the way, MiraCosta College has an excellent astronomy program. So some highlights in addition, we're working with interesting people. I was on a special assignment at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., and got to work with Sally Ride, who was the first U.S. woman in space and later became a UCSD physics professor. And oh, by the way, in addition to her physics and astrophysics degrees, she has a degree in English. And my friend Marta Bonn-Meyer, who worked at the same facility where I worked, she was an aeronautical engineer and the first woman flight crew member on the triple-sonic SR-71. So flying at 2,000 miles per hour, basically. And in her spare time, she was a champion aerobatics pilot. So it turns out I was able to put all of those seemingly unrelated tools, skills, and interests to work at NASA. The writing and editing, the math and science, experimental psychology, teaching, speaking, leadership, computers, and the business and financial management skills. So my advice is to open doors and keep them open. Follow your interests, be curious, accept challenges. Try new things, expand your knowledge, and seize opportunities, including things like going to TechTrek. So thank you all, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Any questions, you can pop them into the chat and we'll just go back to if you could stop sharing, Linda, that would be great. But take questions.
Okay. All right.
Do we have any questions there yet? Oh,
I am looking, not yet. Let's
lots
see.
of lovely comments.
Lots of lovely comments.
Okay, well, let's go ahead then and push forward and look at our, can everyone see this screen that says 2021 TechTrek Campus?
Not yet.
How is that? No?
Oh, I'll just answer real quickly the question about did you go inside a shuttle? Yes, actually I did, but anyone can now because there's one on display in Washington, D.C. at the Air and Space Museum. And there's one up in LA, although I haven't checked out that exhibit, so I don't know for sure if you can go inside that one.
Okay, I'm not quite sure why I'm not getting this up. Okay. Well, I do share screen. There you are, I've got it. I think I've got it here.
I am seeing something.
Yes, you got it.
Yeah.